What would happen if I told you that the reason the person you like does not look at you the way you wish has nothing to do with your appearance, with what you have, or with what you do for them, but with something that happens in a place you cannot see, inside your own nervous system, in a part of you that acts before your conscious mind even has time to form a thought? Because there is something that most men never discover. Something that is not taught in any school, that does not appear in any conversation between friends, and that nevertheless determines everything in the terrain of attraction. And it is this: calm is the oldest language of strength, and the man who masters it does not need to pursue anyone, because people naturally draw close to whoever radiates that deep serenity, that stability, that does not break with a silence, that does not waver with a rejection, that does not beg for a response. I know what you are thinking. It sounds good in theory, but the reality is that when someone truly matters to you, maintaining that calm is one of the most difficult things that exists, because the brain is not on your side. The brain has its own priorities. And in this video, I am going to tell you exactly what happens inside it, why you react the way you react, and what you can do to recover control of something that, without anyone ever having explained it to you, you have been losing for years. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And the ability to remain calm in the face of uncertainty, to stay grounded when your nervous system is telling you to panic, is the most powerful reaction you can cultivate. It is what separates the man who is controlled by his emotions from the man who controls them. But before getting into all of that, I need you to sit with this for a moment. I need you to think of a specific situation. That message you sent that got no response. That moment when you rushed to be available and noticed something changing in the dynamic, even though you could not name it. That feeling that the more you put in, the less it seemed to matter. Do you remember that feeling? Good, because that feeling has an explanation. And that explanation has a name. And once you know it, you will never be able to see your own reactions the same way again. Let us start with something that neuroscientists have been studying for decades and that most men never connect to their personal relationships: the autonomic nervous system. That system that regulates your breathing, your heart rate, the tension in your muscles, the speed of your thoughts without asking your permission. That system has two predominant states. One is the state of activation, of alert, of response to what the brain perceives as threat. The other is the state of calm, of safety, of openness. And now comes something I want you to process carefully, because it completely changes the way you will understand everything that follows. When you wait for a response that does not arrive, when you interpret someone's silence as a signal that something has gone wrong, when you feel that impulse to write again to see what happens, your nervous system has entered a state of alert. Not because you are in real danger, but because your brain has classified that situation in a completely automatic and unconscious way as a threat to your social survival. And that is not a metaphor. It is literally what happens at a neurological level. The human being is a social animal. And during millions of years of evolution, being accepted or rejected by the group was not a matter of ego, it was a matter of survival. Those who were left outside the group died. And that alarm system that kept us alive for millennia is exactly the same system that today activates when someone you are attracted to does not return your message. The problem is that this system does not distinguish between a real threat and a perceived one. It does not distinguish between a predator on the savannah and a 2-hour silence on the phone. For your nervous system, both things produce the same cascade of responses, and that cascade of responses is what leads you to make decisions that, seen from the outside, make no sense at all. Writing more, explaining yourself more, looking for signals where there are none, interpreting every small gesture as a confirmation of your greatest fear. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When you understand that your nervous system is reacting to a perceived threat, not a real one, you can begin to exercise that power. You can begin to distinguish between the signal and the noise, and that distinction is the first step toward regaining control. And here is the paradox that poisons everything. The moment your nervous system enters that state of alert, something changes in you that the other person perceives, even if they cannot articulate it. Something in your tone, in your energy, in the way you relate. Something that communicates at a level deeper than any word that you are activated, that something is missing in you, that you need her to do something so that you can be okay. And that, precisely that, is what extinguishes desire. Not because women are cruel, not because they enjoy the suffering of others, but because desire, at an evolutionary level, activates in response to signals of strength, of stability, of resources. And anxiety, neediness, invisible emotional urgency transmit exactly the opposite. They transmit scarcity. They transmit that this man needs something he does not have. Think about it. Have you ever been around someone who was desperate for your approval? How did it make you feel? Did it make you want to be closer to them, or did it make you want to create distance? The answer is almost always the latter, because desperation signals that something is missing. It signals that the person is not complete on their own. And that incompleteness is something that instinctively makes us want to pull away. Not because we are cruel, but because we are wired to seek partners who are whole, who can stand on their own, who can contribute to the relationship rather than drain it. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who governed one of the largest empires in history, and who found time amidst wars and decisions that cost thousands of lives to write one of the most profound philosophical diaries that have survived, summarized it in a way that remains valid almost 2,000 years later. He wrote that it is not things that disturb us, but the judgments we make about things. And in this context, that translates into something very precise. It is not the silence of that person that destabilizes you. It is the meaning your mind assigns to that silence. It is the story you tell yourself about what that silence means. And that story, in most cases, is completely distorted by the state of activation in which your nervous system finds itself. But I am going to tell you something even more unsettling, and I want you to take it in calmly because it is uncomfortable, but it is true. The intensity you feel towards someone who is not completely available is not always love. Sometimes, and more often than we like to acknowledge, it is anxious activation. It is the nervous system responding to a pattern of uncertainty that produces the same symptoms as desire, but that has a completely different origin. Psychologists who study attachment behavior have spent decades documenting something that is difficult to accept when you first hear it. The bonding patterns we develop in childhood in response to how our caregivers did or did not respond to our needs become templates that the adult brain applies automatically in all its intimate relationships. And one of the most striking things about those templates is that most people feel a more intense attraction towards those who reproduce the pattern they learned as children, even when that pattern causes them suffering. In other words, if as a child you learned that affection was something you had to fight for, that it arrived unpredictably, that sometimes it was there and sometimes it was not, your adult nervous system will tend to interpret that same unpredictability in the other person as a signal that it is worth fighting for. As a signal that this is real, as a signal that there is something here that deserves every effort. And the effect is devastating, because the more that person's attention becomes scarce, the more intense your activation becomes. And the more intense your activation, the more seeking behaviors you carry out. And the more seeking behaviors you carry out, the more you transmit that energy of neediness that extinguishes the other's interest. It is a circle, and the way out of that circle is not in doing the right things from inside it. The way out is in recognizing that you are inside it. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And one of the greatest wastes is the time we spend chasing people who are not available. We waste our energy, our attention, our dignity on people who are not giving back. And we do it because our nervous system has been conditioned to chase uncertainty. But once you recognize the pattern, you can begin to break it." Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was born a slave and who became one of the most influential minds of the ancient world, had something he constantly said to his students. He said that there are things that are within our power and things that are not, and that confusing one with the other is the source of almost all human suffering. In our context, what is within your power is the state from which you act, the thoughts you let pass, and the ones you feed, the decisions you make when the impulse arrives and you decide whether to follow it or let it go. What is not within your power is the other person's response, the level of interest they feel, the moment they decide to write to you or not. And the more energy you invest trying to control what you cannot control, the less energy you have left to cultivate the only thing that is completely in your hands, your own state, your own presence, your own peace. And that is where the real work begins. And here I want to pause for a moment because I know there is something you may be thinking at this point, and I want to address it directly. Everything I am describing may sound like distance, like coldness, like putting a barrier between you and what you feel. And it is not that. I am not talking about stopping feeling. I am not suggesting that you become someone inaccessible or emotionally anesthetized. That is not stability, that is armor. And armor, while it protects, also prevents real contact. What I am describing is something completely different. It is the capacity to feel with intensity without that intensity taking control of your actions. It is being able to desire someone without that desire becoming the center of gravity of your life. It is being able to be deeply interested in a person without losing the reference of who you are when she is not watching. Daniel Goleman, the psychologist who popularized the concept of emotional intelligence, spent years studying what differentiated people who made better decisions under emotional pressure. And what he found was something that can seem counterintuitive. It was not that those people felt less. It was that there was a space, however small, between the stimulus and the response. A moment of pause in which the mind could intervene before the impulse became action. That space is everything. That space is the difference between sending that message from anxiety or choosing not to send it from calm. It is the difference between reacting to the other's silence with more noise or letting it be and getting on with your day. It is the difference between building your day around whether that person responds or not and building it around what belongs to you, what you have to do, what makes you a more complete person regardless of the outcome. Epictetus taught, "No great thing is created suddenly." And the ability to create that space between stimulus and response is not created suddenly. It is built through practice, through the willingness to pause, through the discipline of observing your own impulses before acting on them. And as you build that space, you become less reactive. And as you become less reactive, you become more attractive. And now comes something I want you to listen to carefully because this is where most conversations on this subject go wrong. When someone talks about mystery in the context of attraction, the most common interpretation is that it involves hiding things on purpose, not responding in order to generate uncertainty, disappearing for days to see if the other person looks for you, acting indifferent when you actually feel something. Those things are not mystery. They are manipulation. And manipulation, while it may produce short-term reactions, builds a dynamic that is not going anywhere worth going. Real mystery, the kind that generates genuine and sustained curiosity in another person, does not come from what you artificially conceal. It comes from what you genuinely have to explore. It comes from being someone who has not handed everything of themselves over in the first 3 encounters. It comes from having layers, from having an inner world that does not fit in a single conversation, from being someone who feels deeply but who does not externalize everything they feel the moment they feel it. Seneca wrote something in his letters that has been cited for centuries because it remains completely accurate. He wrote that the greatest good is harmony of the soul with itself. And although he wrote it in the context of moral philosophy, it connects directly to what we are talking about. A man who has harmony with himself, who does not need the external world to validate what he already knows about himself, that man projects something that has no easy substitute. He projects peace. And peace in a world where almost everyone is activated, anxious, urgent, is one of the rarest and most magnetic qualities that exists. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When your thoughts are colored by calm and self-possession, your soul reflects that. And people will feel it. They will be drawn to it. Not because you are trying to attract them, but because you are a source of stability in a world of chaos." But I am going to go even further because until now we have talked about what happens inside you. And there is something that happens between you and the other person that also needs to be named. When two people interact, especially in the early phases of an attraction, there is a dynamic that psychologists call the relational frame. The frame is the implicit structure that defines who has more perceived value in the interaction. It is not something negotiated verbally. It is not something either person decides consciously. It establishes itself automatically through very subtle signals in the first exchanges. And the most powerful signal that defines that frame is not words. It is behaviors. Specifically, it is the relationship between what each person invests and what each person receives. When a man consistently invests more than he receives, when his attention, his time, his emotional availability flow towards the other person in a consistent and asymmetrical way, the frame becomes established in a manner that is very difficult to reverse without doing something that changes the dynamic in a radical way. And that frame says, without words, that he needs this more than she does, that she is the prize, that he is the candidate. And that frame, once established, affects everything that comes after because people do not consciously establish it, but they do react to it. And the most common reaction towards someone who constantly positions themselves below is not gratitude. It is indifference, or worse, it is loss of respect. Now then, the antidote to this is not to position yourself above. It is not to adopt an attitude of superiority, or to treat anyone with calculated coldness. The antidote is something much simpler and much more difficult at the same time. It is reciprocity. It is adjusting what you give to what you receive, not as retaliation, but as a signal that you value yourself enough not to invest indefinitely in something that is not responding to that investment. And when that happens, when a man genuinely begins to reserve his attention for those who deserve it, rather than dispersing it indiscriminately in the hope that something returns, the dynamic changes. Not always immediately, but it changes because the frame changes. I want to tell you something that ethologists, the scientists who study animal behavior in natural environments, have documented for decades. In almost all social species, the individuals who generate the most attention from others are not those who emit the most signals of need. They are those who least need the validation of the group to keep functioning. Those who have their own resources, a clear position, and a quiet indifference towards the approval of others. And although we are infinitely more complex than any other species, a part of our brain, the oldest part, the one that functions beneath language and conscious thought, continues responding to those same signals. It continues evaluating the people around us in terms of their signals of stability, of resources, of independence. And it continues reacting with attraction towards whoever seems to have those things, and with indifference or distance towards whoever seems to lack them. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future." When you are not anxiously dependent on her approval, you can enjoy the present moment with her. You can be fully present, fully engaged, fully yourself. And that presence is what makes her want to be close to you. Now we arrive at the point that, in my opinion, is the most misunderstood of all that this subject touches on, and it is purpose. There is a great deal of talk about a man with purpose being more attractive. And it is true. But the reason it is true is not what most people think. It is not that women are attracted to success as such, nor to money, nor to visible achievements. The reason is much deeper than that. A man with genuine purpose has something that cannot be faked. He has an axis. He has an internal point of reference that does not depend on external circumstances or on anyone else's validation. He has something that matters to him more than the approval of any specific person. And that makes him naturally less reactive, less anxious, less hungry for attention. And that reduced reactivity, that lesser hunger for attention, is precisely what generates curiosity in others. Because curiosity does not activate in response to what we already know and completely understand. It activates in response to what we still cannot fully decipher, in response to what has depth we have not yet managed to explore, in response to something that, in some way, does not need us but might choose us. Viktor Frankl described in his work something that goes far beyond seduction, but which illuminates it in an unexpected way. He spent years in concentration camps in the most extreme conditions of deprivation and violence that a human being can experience, and came out of there with a conclusion he dedicated the rest of his life to defending. The conclusion was that the man who has a why can endure almost any how, and in our context that why is what gives you stability when someone does not respond, what allows you to keep functioning when a dynamic does not turn out as you expected. What means that your emotional state does not depend on whether that person chose you or not, because you already have something to get up for that has nothing to do with her. Without that why, without that access, another person's attention becomes the only thing that centers you. And when that happens, when a person becomes the center of gravity of your emotional well-being, something happens that we already described. You begin to orbit them. You begin to revolve around them, and from there it is impossible to relate as equals because you are no longer in a position of equality. I am going to be very direct with you about something that almost nobody says in these conversations, and it is that there is a version of everything I have explained so far that is healthy, and there is a version that is not. The healthy version is to genuinely build, to invest in your life, in your work, in your health, in your friendships, in your intellectual and emotional development until those things are the genuine center of your existence. until a conversation or a silence from someone you are attracted to does not have the power to destabilize you because you already have solid ground beneath your feet. The version that is not healthy is using silence, distance, or coldness as tools to provoke reactions in the other person, calculating how long you take to respond in order to generate anxiety, disappearing not because you have things to do but to see if she looks for you, appearing indifferent in a deliberate way when you actually feel something. The difference between these two versions is not in the external behavior. Sometimes the behavior looks identical. The difference lies in the source, in the why, in whether you are genuinely centered or whether you are performing centeredness. And the human brain, even if it can't consciously explain it, detects that difference with astonishing precision. There is something in posture, tone of voice, response timing, micro-expressions, and the consistency between what is said and what is done that communicates far more than any strategy can hide. Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And how you react to her silence, her distance, her absence reveals everything about your internal state. If you react from a place of genuine calm, she will feel it. If you react from a place of performed calm, she will feel that too. And the difference between the two is what determines whether she is drawn to you or pulled away. So what do you do with all of this? First, you become aware of your own nervous system. You start noticing when you are activated, when your heart rate increases, when your thoughts start racing, when you feel the impulse to reach out. You simply notice it. You don't judge it. You don't try to suppress it. You just observe it. Second, you create space. You practice pausing before you act. You count to 10 before you send that message. You take a breath before you respond. You give your conscious mind a chance to intervene before your nervous system takes over. Third, you build your axis. You develop your purpose. You invest in your life, your work, your health, your friendships. You make sure that your emotional well-being does not depend on any single person. You become a man who is complete on his own. Fourth, you practice reciprocity. You give what you receive. You adjust your investment to match the other person's investment. You don't over-invest in someone who is under-investing in you. And you do this not as a strategy, but as a reflection of your self-worth. Fifth, you cultivate presence. You practice being fully present in your interactions without performing, without calculating, without trying to control the outcome. You simply are, and you trust that your presence is enough. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When you cultivate thoughts of calm, self-respect, and presence, your soul reflects that. And people will feel it. They will be drawn to it. Not because you are trying to attract them, but because you are a source of stability in a world of chaos. That is the power of calm. That is the power of the man who masters his own nervous system. That is the power of the man who does not need to chase because he is already complete. Be that man. Build that life. And watch how everything changes. If you made it to the end of this video, comment, "I made it." And I will personally reply to you myself. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to be part of this and give it a like if you enjoyed it.